Hello everyone, my name is Ratu Daarin, and in this video we are going to be talking about asking and giving advice. Now before we start, we have to know what is advice. Advice is guidance or recommendations offered with regard to prudent future action. Now you may be wondering, why do people seek or give advice? Because it is beneficial. When the exchange is done well, people on both sides of the table benefit. Those who ask for advice develop better solutions to problems than they would have on their own. And research shows they can overcome cognitive biases, self-serving rationales, and other flaws in their logic. Those who give advice shape important decisions while empowering others to act. And as engaged listeners, they can also learn a lot from the problems that people bring them. Here are some phrases to consider when asking for advice. The first one is, what do you suggest or recommend? For example, what do you suggest we do this evening? The next one is, what should I do? For example, what should I do when I'm in Brighton? The next one is, what would you do? For example, what would you do if you were me? The next one is, do you have any advice? For example, do you have any advice on visiting the British Museum? The next one is, could you advise me? For example, could you advise me on the best way to get to Boston Harbor? These are just the most common phrases to use when you ask for advice. There are also many other ways to ask for advice, but these will get you started. Now moving on to how to give advice. I'm going to show you 5 simple ways to give advice. Number 1 is to use a modal verb. There are 2 modal verbs we often use for giving advice. The first one is should, and the second one is ought to. Both mean the same thing, but work in slightly different ways. Let's look at some examples. You should do more traveling. You shouldn't drink so much beer. As you can see above, after should, we use an infinitive without to. You ought to do more traveling. You ought not to drink so much beer. Unlike should, we always use to in ought to for giving advice. The second way is to make it into a question. To make advice less direct, we can use a question to make the person we are advising consider about the advice we are giving to them. For example, why don't you do some more tidying? How about doing some more tidying? With the question, why don't you, we use an infinitive without to. And when we use how about to make a question, we use gerund after it. The third way is to put yourself in the person's position. If someone is asking for your advice, sometimes it's useful to imagine yourself being in that person's position. For example, if I were you, I would study more. Remember to use an infinitive after would and not to. To make this negative, put not after would. The fourth way is to make a suggestion. A suggestion or recommendation is another good way of giving advice that isn't too direct. You can use the words suggest or recommend. For example, I would suggest doing more of an effort. I would recommend doing this instead. Use gerund after suggest or recommend to explain your advice to the listener. To make these negative, put not before your gerund. The last way is advice in a stronger way. Sometimes you need to make your advice stronger to let the listener know that it's really important. We can use the expression, you had better, to do this. For example, you had better start working on your homework. You'd better finish this assignment in time. We use an infinitive after better to explain our advice and add not after better to make the sentence negative. And lastly, don't forget to be grateful. Asking someone for advice is an investment. You are investing your time to seek out and collect information from knowledgeable resources. but the advice giver is also making an investment. They are spending their precious time sharing their knowledge and experiences with you. So it should go without saying to be grateful and to say thank you.